What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Twink Revolution, episode 10. I'm Sam.
And I'm Gian. Welcome to the show. How you been doing, Sam?
No longer sick.
Yeah, I'm not sick either anymore.
Yeah, I was sick all weekend because of you, I believe.
Yeah, that was probably my fault. I'm so sorry.
Fucking bitch.
Have you been eating all the Chick-fil-A now that you can?
Totally, all the chicken. As a vegan, I love that shit.
I've never been to a Chick-fil-A.
Oh, so when I used to be in conferences for like the libertarian movement, a lot of like the more southern Midwest states would always have Chick-fil-A as like the lunch, and I'd always get a salad. But apparently it was good. Their sweet tea is fucking good.
Really? I never understood the fixation.
Yeah.
And also, like the idea that they're a good corporation now is very entertaining to me.
Yeah. Well, I actually used to work at Chick-fil-A.
Really?
Yeah. She liked it. And then they all died in Wisconsin, and they came back like a few years later.
Huh.
Yeah.
They don't exist in San Francisco, and if I'm like traveling outside of San Francisco, I don't exactly hanker for Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, I mean, there's no good like fast food places in SF though. There's no fucking Panera.
Is that the good one?
Yeah, it's the best one.
I wasn't really raised on like many kinds of American fast food. I guess it was like Jack in the Box and Burger King and shit.
Burger King's the worst. You should guillotine yourself.
I don't really eat a lot of this stuff anymore. Yeah. Like it doesn't kind of fit with my patrician bearing if I'm seen like shoving a Whopper in my face these days.
But I've been loving all the Chick-fil-A progressive now mantra. It really encapsulates the tie-in because at the same time as all this shit coming about Pete Buttigieg and being like a right-wing show, which is so surprising.
I'm shocked. Honestly, I don't understand how a gay man can have bad politics.
No, never.
We've covered this before. I think it was back on our episode when David was with us. We were talking about how like being gay inherently means you have good politics, right?
Totally. Peter Thiel is a good example.
Yeah, so we have been following, like many others, I think, this week, the exploits of Mayor Peter.
Yeah.
And he's out ahead in Iowa in one poll.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really mean shit. Like, don't stress yourself out about it, right? But like, it is interesting that the narrative, like, they've been trying to push this guy on us for a while.
Well, also, they're totally ignoring that a huge part of Pete Buttigieg's campaign has been massively spending money in Iowa, as if it's like going to cause all the other states to follow with. So he's been spending a high portion of his like funding in this one state.
Yeah, I mean, this is always like the desperate death rattle of like shitty astroturfed campaigns, right? Is that they think that if they can kind of make a momentum argument for like, well, look, these early voting states were doing really great in them, so all you rubes, should start voting for us everywhere else.
Yeah, and these polls are all flawed. I mean, during the 2016 campaign, states were supposed to go to Hillary, but surprise, Bernie won them because they don't usually poll the demographics that often go towards more progressive voices.
Well, yeah, and certainly not like the whole kind of likely voters and registered Democrats and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see, I was just reading a thing the other day about the many fishy ways in which people correct for sort of systemic sampling bias in polls. So you got like, they will extrapolate out from like, 10% of the people we surveyed in this 500-person set had a college education or something. And they go, well, it turns out 20% of people in the state have a college degree or something.
Yeah.
So they basically like then just go and like weight those results, and it's just fucking wacky. It's reading tea leaves and shit.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's just been more and more shit coming out. So I was reading some BuzzFeed article, I think it was, which is the best journalism. How his whole Iowa campaign is to appeal to like working class rural Americans, which, a Harvard graduate who speaks like a bunch of languages and is like this like bourgeois, like he can't even act working class.
No,
like,
he's so relatable.
He's so relatable.
Just the most like whomst amongst us has not learned some Norwegian in order to be insufferable at dinner parties.
Totally.
Yeah, he really sucks.
Yeah.
Although it's not super surprising, right? Because there was a thing that came out about his initial entry into politics in 2010 was sort of cuddling up to Tea Party elements, right? This is before he came out and like.
Oh, is he not out yet?
No, he only came out like 3 years ago, didn't he?
I have no idea. I don't care enough about him to figure out when he came out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the take-home point about Pete Buttigieg is that he's just a relic of another time.
Yeah.
We were watching that show, The Politician. It's like a Netflix special. Yeah, it's funny. It's like some Ryan Murphy show, and it's about a kid whose entire life goal is to become president. And so he spent a lot of time like studying the lives of successful presidents and things like that in the campaigns. And that's kind of just Pete Buttigieg. Like, there's nothing else going on here.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's like, got to go to Harvard, got to do the military service, but like, not so much that you accidentally, get indoctrinated into that, but like just enough that you can't be accused of being a draft dodger.
Mm-hmm.
Did he do a Rhodes Scholarship? Because that would be the other way to do this.
He was kind of gay in the show.
Yeah, a bit gay.
But at least he was hotter than Pete Buttigieg, and the guy he was with was definitely hotter than Chasten.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chasten.
Yeah,
there was also an article about Chasten Buttigieg and his family and their many family dramas and his two evangelical brothers. Yeah. Who say he wasn't actually bullied or not accepted by his family or something. And
I have no idea.
It's intensely boring.
I don't give a shit.
These people are intensely boring. I hate them. I wish he would just drop out and go get his fucking Goldman Sachs lobbying job like he's been planning all along.
Yeah, I mean, if it was true, I mean, it's still like Pete Buttigieg is pushing for the demographic that probably isn't a fan of the gays in general. I mean... Or I guess they don't give a shit. Like, they're not going to be voting for him because they care about a gay president.
Well, I think it's right-wing liberals is his demographic. To the
Yeah.
extent that, they're kind of fine. Like, they are over the cultural war issues and probably are willing to pat themselves on the back roundly to congratulate themselves on their progressivism for being willing to vote for a incredibly right-wing gay man.
Yeah.
Sort of gay Hitler. You're like, oh, I'm so progressive. I finally have a gay man who will do a Holocaust or something. I mean, this is the internal logic of this shit, right? Is that they are so. It's such a non-issue. For the kinds of liberal voters who like find this kind of down on the farm, good old boy religious act compelling or interesting.
Yeah, I actually saw a poll on Twitter. It was like, would you rather vote for Biden or Pete Buttigieg? And most people said, where's the gun? But for me, I'm like...
What did you answer?
I said Buttigieg because if we get the gay candidate out of the way, we can never use it again. It's like, oh, we've had our first gay candidate. I mean...
I know twink representation matters, and given that the Constitution says you have to be 35 to run, I think that's going to be the next civil rights landmark for presidents. Is
ageism?
Well, yeah, just how do we finally get a twink in the Oval Office?
Well, I'll do it. I volunteer as tribute.
You're going to age out soon. You've only got so long left, and you cannot run. You have to get a constitutional amendment through first to get that age limit changed, and then. Then you got to get elected. It's an election cycle. You have to get into machine politics and go to Harvard. You have to enroll in the military. You have to learn 6 languages and marry an incredibly unattractive man.
Wait, that's the requirements? I thought I just needed a podcast to become president.
No, they changed it. That's what I'm saying.
Fuck.
Although actually, no, you're probably right. I mean, I think the problem is that Pete Buttigieg has not read the updated playbook where having a podcast or reality show or something is actually like fine. Nobody gives a fuck about this office at all. Mm-hmm. The stakes of it are relatively low unless you're like trying to do something with it specific.
This is totally off topic, but it's kind of related to the presidential campaign and podcasters. I saw Andrew Yang tweet talking about having a presidential forum with Sam Harris and Joe Rogan being the hosts, and I wanted to slit my wrist right then.
Oh, that's Joe Rogan, America's foremost public intellectual.
Yeah.
I've no, yeah.
It'd be 2 hours of what's your thoughts on Islam?
Well, or worse, I think
Yeah.
that might accidentally stumble into some sort of self-reflection or some kind of metacognition around like, who are we as a country and what are our values? No, it would be 2 hours of them talking about their like DMT versus meditation experiences.
Their ayahuasca trips in Peru.
Yeah, it'd be Joe Rogan being like, yeah, man, like DMT is like blow your fucking mind. it just like expand your horizon. Sam Harris would be like, yeah, that's true. I've had experiences like that while meditating. And yeah, we would not hear the end of that podcast because we would all have killed ourselves.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, that was totally off topic, but it came to my mind.
These are the important pressing issues of the day.
But kind of going back to this whole booty judge thing is this kind of facade of progressivism because he's gay. But I think just one candidate who's not president, but is a House representative, I believe.
Part of the squad.
Yeah, she's part of the squad, which is weird because I know nothing about her until like this past week. But she came out with this.
Who?
Ayanna Pressley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
She came out with some like massive criminal justice resolution, which I read. It was pretty short. It was good. I agree with like 95% of what she put in there. It's like get rid of the death penalty and get rid of like life sentences and like decriminalize like victimless and like poverty crimes. But the irony of it is just hilarious because a lot of the things she called for beyond just like reforms to the criminal justice project was also like a Green New Deal and massive public housing and like Medicare for like healthcare for everyone and shit like that.
A framework for access to healthcare?
Totally. But I'm like
healthcare for all who want it.
But you would think that she would have endorsed Bernie Sanders, who's by far the best candidate on criminal justice. I mean, he's the only one, to my knowledge, who wants to give felons voting rights, to actually has a massive affordable housing plan, believes in actual Medicare for all, not some like hacked up like bullshit where it's like we're just gonna lead our way in, just like Obamacare said like in 2008.
But isn't that sort of because she's the one member of the squad who broke and endorsed Warren instead, right? Which and then it sort of turned out she's been a big time Clintonite in the party forever, and it's sort of just symptomatic of like she could be sincere. She could genuinely believe all these things. I did notice that the resolution that you send over has a lot of like weasel words in it. It's like we should convene public assemblies and town halls in order to evaluate, reforming the crimes bill, yada yada yada. And this is just how like machine politics works, right? Is like you wait your turn in line, you endorse the person that the machine insists you endorse, you turn up the rally on their behalf, and then you wait your turn. And in some sense, right, the reason Bernie is so hated and why there's sort of a continual stream of these just completely uninspiring centrists, offered up to us as alternatives to Bernie is the machine is like just kind of broken. It's broken down. It's busted. And so that's why we get excitement about Buttigieg. I think Warren's star is fading a little bit because
totally.
The fact that Biden is just unassailable is hilarious, right? I mean, he's just like his support has not dropped no matter what happens or no matter what like changes in the face of this election. He's just like ahead.
Yeah, his crackhead son needs to put him in a nursing home. That's
yeah. I mean, definitely. I think the only thing that was compromising him was that he kept making appearances, and it's been very good for his political career thus far that he's slowed down on doing that. I mean, good on him.
I mean, for Ayanna Pressley, the argument's like, oh, she's from Massachusetts, and so is Warren, and that's why she supported her, which I can get. But if you're truly a progressive who wants to push for a more working class society, you shouldn't just follow machine politics. You should do what's actually best for the working class of the country.
Well, yeah, that would be assuming that the goal was anything except to sort of be, inculcated into the party power structure of like the permanent political class of this country. And so to the extent that I'm sure all sorts of like horse trading and favor trading went on in Massachusetts, right, in order for Pressley to get elected in the first place, or at least even basically be allowed to run and not have a bunch of like dark money dumped against her or whatever.
Also, the coverage of this whole resolution coming out was hilarious because it was basically just focused on her decriminalizing sex work, which, like, sure, cool, like, we both agree with that, but also there was way more radical notions in this resolution, like abolishing death penalty. Like, why isn't that the title? Like, that's, to me, is even more important because it harms, like, people who have absolutely no power in our society. Or, like, how she called for massive society structural changes on, like, housing and, like, healthcare and stuff. Like, to me, that's a much more pragmatic way to solve mass incarceration because you're ending the cycles that actually cause everyone to go into these systems. I mean,
yeah, looking at structural issues is un-American, though. So don't you dare. Yeah. I mean, that's why I think I find Buttigieg's like 2004 era politics so hilariously alienating. I mean, it's like the legacy there, right, is Bill Clinton's entire thing in sort of 92 and 96 was to run to the right of his own party, and therefore be able to get away with shit that like his own party would never have been able to get away with. He like running to the right of the field is like a classic Democratic tactic.
Yeah.
The problem is it stopped working. It just does not work anymore. And then seeing somebody like Buttigieg trying it in 2019 is just so funny. Like it's so out of step with the time. Like I can't wait for him to sort of like, I don't know, take a position on World War II or something. Like, U.S. involvement in that terrible brewing storm in Europe or something. Like, this is the level of his politics. They are 30 years out of date.
I'm just waiting for the full reenactment of the whole Bill Clinton era. I'm waiting for all the rape scandals to come out and then be hidden by his first husband.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, for legal purposes, that this is satire.
Yeah, this is completely satire. Don't take us serious at all. But I guess this whole notion of progressive, masking, neoliberal politics really ties into our entire culture as said. I mean, you mentioned to me earlier this week how you saw on TikTok, yes, we're bringing up TikTok again.
I was sick and I had nothing else to do, and I became a TikTok person.
It's amusing.
I'm into it now.
Yeah. But how there's this trend of like straight girls referring to themselves as like bottoms. And if you're not sure what a bottom is, it's the person who takes the penis in a gay relationship or it's a male relationship.
Or just look up the Vox Explainer on Vox Explainer 10 things you didn't know about gay sex.
Yeah. But it kind of shows like the commodification of like sexuality and identity to like build clout. I mean, the opposite is straight boys, primarily like like mid-teens to like college, pretending to be gay to get gay followers and kind of because everyone loves the gays now. Gays are like the trendy it thing,
right? They're completely unthreatening to any conventional power structure, and so to the extent that the gay baiting on TikTok is hilarious.
Yeah,
not to say not arousing occasionally, but certainly it's sort of transparent, right? And it's people do it because it works. This straight girls, and this is like teenage straight girls describing themselves as bottoms or having bottom energy was just sort of soul crushing.
Yeah.
It's like we did, gay liberation and women's liberation both just didn't happen. Where, you are...
Where's all the libs being like, you're appropriating gay culture?
Yes, cultural appropriation for sure.
Totally.
But also just tragic. Like, good God.
Yeah.
Imagine if that was sort of what you thought you had to do to be interesting.
If that was my daughter, I'd kick her out. That way she can feel what it's like to be like an actual gay person back in my day.
You're no daughter of mine.
You're a top and you'll like it.
Yeah, no daughter of mine is going to be a bottom.
But it reminded me of an article I saw last week by your second favorite Slovenian Marxist, Žižek. I'm the first because
hell yeah.
Yeah. And he basically talks about this commodification of gender identity and like sexuality as a really distraction from the real root issues of corporate capitalism.
Yeah, the title of it was great. It's For Show Female Empowerment and Gender Fluidity Are Simply the Latest Instruments of Corporate Capitalism by Slavoj Žižek.
Yeah.
And we're not, like, for once, for the first and only time, we're going to discuss Žižek, perhaps quote Žižek, but not attempt to imitate Žižek. We are eliding all the sniffing, the idiosyncratic phrasing.
Yeah.
We're just going straight forward. That's my commitment to you, the listener.
Wonderful. But yeah, it's basically he talks about some female shaving razor company doing an advertisement for No Shave November, saying girls can have mustaches too, and that's okay. And it's like, okay, like.
well, and his I am just going to quote the one part. So he's talking about the. I think this is a part of a larger phenomenon which follows this logic. If women try to be beautiful or to obey the models of beauty in a traditional sense, they objectify themselves for men. And he goes on. He says, on one hand, I agree with women's feeling of oppression, but I see the problem with this logic. Let's face it, sexuality involves a degree of self-objectification. For example, when I engaged in the sexual activity, when I embrace a naked person that I love, I abstract, and it is the immanent logic of sexuality, from all the nasty things that are part of the human body, bad odors, remains of dirt, etc. I minimally idealize, in a way, the other's body. Without this, we approach desexualization.
I mean, for one, the thought of visually imagery of Žižek having sex is disgusting. I do not want to think of that.
Yourself. I'm fully erect now.
But also this idea of desexualization, which he talks about a lot in the piece, is totally true. Like, I mean, even the idea of like wanting a desire to follow like classical like gender norms, like the housewife or like wearing a dress and high heels, is often shamed, or like if you just like, oh, you're just being objectified. Like, yeah, for a gay example, like if I go to a club and like I'm going out with friends, I'm not gonna look like a slob. I'm gonna look sexy. Like, no one's going out looking like a piece of shit. Like, you go out to the clubs or like places to socialize and find potential sexual or romantic partners. You want to look hot. Like, no one's like, oh, I want to look ugly.
I want to look unattractive to potential.
Because you're not gonna find
partners,
anyone. Yeah. This is the problem with incels. Is like they kind of buy into this narrative of like, oh, all these women just want the hot guy. Like, well, it's true. Like, you need to work on yourself, but also personality matters too.
Yeah, and I mean the desexualization as a sort of corollary to the idea that you can commodify anything and you can turn it into a marketable product. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's interesting. What does he say here? In the developed West, the ruling ideology is no longer a patriarchy. It is a kind of false openness which also functions as a way to avoid radical mobilization and radical solutions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of true, right? It's a permissiveness, but it also then ends up policing the bounds with which you can express anything regarded as kind of conventional, right? The idea of, women, or straight girls on TikTok are bottoms, is sort of to steal a page from a kind of a gay identity, which looks upon it as say there's nothing wrong with being a bottom, right? Or indeed with maybe being submissive or whatever. The entire kind of point of the Žižek article, and I think there's a lot to be said for it, is like there becomes a thing that a woman is not allowed to be submissive.
Yeah.
Or you are essentially the desire to be seen that way ends up as a product that is sort of repackaged back to you and sold to you.
Yeah, it's a really good example, kind of touching on ability to be objectified, even self-objectification. And he points to the example of kind of like in the Middle East when women do sexually suggestive or objectifying things, that is subversive. But the system we have in the U.S. and most of the West is no longer a subversive like behavior. It's just a part of commodification and building capital revenue. It's why, like, I think it was Sephora just did like a few months ago this whole like gender identity campaign, and it's like, well, no fucking duh. Like, your idea, if you want to grow as a market, and you already have most of the females wearing makeup, you're gonna appeal to the other half of the population, like men and like gender non-conforming people, like mostly men and stuff like that. It's why like the pushing of like the male makeup artist became such a big thing in the last few years. It's like these are no longer subversive things. They were at a time, but they're kind of like so normal where like even the straight boys on TikTok or have like their nails painted or like stuff like that. It's not radical in any sense.
Yeah, and by bleeding it of its meaning and repackaging it, right? I mean, this sort of like the wonders of capitalism is that you can buy, tampons that are specifically marketed for men. And like, that's cool and all, but like the Chick-fil-A thing, to the extent, Chick-fil-A no longer giving money to anti-LGBT causes or whatever, does not then mean that the morally correct thing is to go buy chicken sandwiches from Chick-fil-A. You have missed the fucking point. And similarly, while it's nice when the sort of exploitative machine of capital welcomes people who have been historically marginalized or ignored into the fold, that doesn't mean you've done activism by embracing the mechanism of exploitation. For being woke.
Well, I mean, the whole activism as like consumer choice is such a prevalent thing in society. It's like, oh, it's your fault if you support. Like, I saw people like criticizing people for buying Chick-fil-A. And it's like, I don't give a shit. Like, you can eat whatever you want because guess what? Taco Bell and McDonald's and shit, they're all fucking awful too. Like,
yes, this is the immiseration of humans. Is not exclusively limited to the sort of outside lobbying activities of one fast food restaurant. And certainly like, the time I, got a unsewing pick and took the Nike logo off my sneakers or whatever, does not erase the fact that it was assembled by slaves.
No, never.
So, that's like that's sort of the aesthetic of gender as a packaged commodity, sexuality particularly as a completely non-threatening one, right? Like there are fewer and fewer social consequences to expressing any sort of non-conformant sexuality, and so like why not? If you are marketed as a consumer, marketed to as a consumer, on the basis of like, well, I kissed a boy once and I thought it was okay. I didn't immediately vomit. Like, well, that's a strict category to which you within a sort of market segmentation sense, we can sell you products on your basis.
Yeah, I mean, also the most important point to take from like the Žižek article is this kind of like culture wars, like tolerance for, I don't know, commodifying your imagery and gender and sexuality all the time. It's really a distraction from the actual material issues that are going on. Like, even if you're a feminist, like this should be something you're kind of questioning because it diverts a lot of attention from actual issues like reproductive care and like paid time off for maternity leave. And if you care about international issues like femicide and like mass rape in like war countries, like oh, you get to have a mustache, like that's cool, but it's not challenging any system of power at all. Like
Right. If you believe that the personal is the political, then like you could extrapolate the fact that you felt personally hemmed in, or dare I say oppressed by the social reaction you got to some aspect of how you chose to express yourself, or how you express yourself, or how you look, or how you act, and sort of believing that simply to transgress that mild disapproval you encountered is to do something political is completely fucking insane, for one. And then also just quite offensive to those who might actually have put something on the line for some of these issues, or some might have really risked something, or have really suffered.
Like trans people, like
yeah,
I think there's a difference between like having to like being trans, like you have gender dysphoria, so you have this.
Wow, true scum.
Yeah, sorry.
Some trans people have dysphoria.
Okay, but like you know what I mean. For them, it's more like this is like a necessary aspect of this transitioning for a lot of people, not all of them.
Well, it's certainly the idea that there's higher stakes involved if your sort of health and well-being are truly at stake.
That's what I mean.
And your safety, as opposed to perhaps being like, Jenny down at the office made an unkind comment about the particular shade of lipstick I wore. You're like, well, fuck her. But also, like, there's not a political act to wear that shade of lipstick or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And the idea that there will then be the next week a giant Sephora campaign marketing this shade of lipstick as a radical act. Please come purchase it, and purchase a lot of it to prove those terrible violators of your personal autonomy wrong is just depressingly credulous.
It kind of reminds me of like one of the earliest, most important PR campaigns, the cigarette campaigns targeted towards women, and how women smoking cigarettes is a feminist liberatory act. It's exactly the same as all these other campaigns. Like there's not once viewed as like, oh, that's bad, like you shouldn't smoke. Like the whole background of like why this was done is completely the same, because using woke language or progressive language is a way to build up a consumer base and hide the fact that you're probably treating your workers like shit and destroying the environment and doing a bunch of other awful, vile things.
Yeah, although to be clear, if you are a woman listener and you relate to taking Quaaludes, smoking cigarettes, and cheating on your husband, we fully support you in your struggle.
Yeah, we want opium dens for all.
Bored housewives, arise. You have nothing to lose but ear chains.
I mean, that's my goal. Bored housewife on Quaaludes and wine all day.
Yeah, that sounds kind of amazing. And then you too shall be near a tandem. Turning our tables a little bit, but not. Wait, turning our tables? That's not an expression people use. I'm not doing well today.
There's a song about that, turning tables. It's by who's the like bigger British girl? Adele. She has a song called Turning Tables. So
can I purchase that from a major record label?
I don't know.
Sorry. Turning our attention to something else. That's That's a phrase that humans use. Iran is suffering from a certain amount of unrest right now over the inability to consume gasoline in this case.
Yeah, so their country just raised gas prices and also instituted a rationing system. And there's basically been mass protests across the country of Iran. And what most of the media is kind of really trivializing or like making minor is the fact that most of these gas issues are due to sanctions put on by the U.S. after we abandoned the Iranian nuclear deal.
Oh, we never do that. We never immiserate countries through sanctions. That's not a thing we do.
No,
what are you talking about?
It's just their leaders. That's always been the case.
I like the fact that Iran is fundamentally a market economy, obviously with some command economy aspects, but this would never be pointed to as a failure of capitalism.
No. Remember when there was like, actually, I don't know if you were in the U.S., but there was like a couple years back, there was like the massive lines for gas. Like, no one would be like, oh, the market failed and the government has no responsibility. Like, no, that's not.
Well, the idea when we put massive sanctions on Cuba or Venezuela, and see the inevitable result being that, yes, there's all kinds of human misery generated as a result of the inability to, engage in any sort of economic development.
But they're not related. It's just coincidence that it keeps happening to every country who do it too.
Right, but if it happens to a sort of ostensibly socialist country, then it's a failure of socialism.
Yeah.
If it happens to something that with a market economy, suddenly it's just, well, whoopsie-daisy, what a terrible authoritarian government or something.
Are you trying to say Iran's socialist? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, the glorious Islamic Socialist Republic of Iran. We pledge our fealty to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei.
But the whole point of this protest is it's really got all the like neocons and like neolibs super excited because it's a country we also want to institute political overthrowing of the leaders.
They do salivate at the least opportunities, don't they?
I mean, they've tried like this past year numerous times. I'm not going to go into all of that because that's a whole other topic. But
I think this is them going back to the Žižek thing. Is they've been so thoroughly desexualized that they cannot be aroused by anything except the sort of full scale obliteration of a Middle Eastern country.
Maybe that's what Hillary likes bombing countries so much. She gets a sexual thrill from seeing the bombs dropped in all these countries.
It makes sense. It's the ultimate transgression.
But the whole thing of coverage is there's been a lot of progressive, like, pink washing and, like, I don't know the woman term, but, like, we'll say woman washing because I don't know if that's a term yet.
Washerwomen.
Washerwomen. And it's kind of really interesting because with Latin America, they tend to be pretty progressive, so we can't really utilize those tactics to slam as, like, being sexist and homophobic. But for, like, countries with more conservative, traditional, or non-Christian cultures, we often focus on feminism. I mean, Afghanistan's a great example of we're going there to free the women. Same thing's going on with Iran, and one person who's been really vocal is, I looked up her name. I completely forgot. It's Masai Ayanna, and she's basically the creator of My Stealthy Freedom, which is, if you've seen the videos of like Iranian women taking off their veils and being like subversive, that's her organization.
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
So she's not allowed back in Iran. When she was like 19, she took her veil off and got in trouble, and the judge let her off, and then she went to the U.S., I believe. She's in the U.S. now. But she's really been pushing this narrative of it's not just protest against gas. It's also about a complete overthrow of the Islamic Republic. And it totally could be. I have no idea. I'm not in fucking Iran. But
actually, that's a lie. We are broadcasting Twink Revolution, the gay socialism podcast from Tehran right now.
I wish. And her language is very problematic in how she addresses the issue. For one, she called for the Twitter banning of Khamenei, and due to the internet shutdown in the country, and
because they banned or they disconnected most of the internet in Iran on the basis of these gas protests.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which I'm always skeptical of anyone who's calling for like the censorship of world leaders or anyone in general, really, like on social media.
It is sort of running and telling the teacher, isn't it, in some ways?
Totally, and she's done this a lot.
Let's ban Trump. He's violated Twitter's terms of service. Like, fuck off.
Like, pretty much if you don't do anything correct towards Iran in her idea, you're just, like, being a dick to women. Like, she even actually, after the New Zealand shooting, when what's her name? Jacinda
Ardern.
When she wore the hijab, she basically shamed her as like pushing like this sexist notion of hijab and all this, and it's like a bunch of Muslim people got shot. Like, very poor taste.
And being skeptical of those who take absolutist positions on what are effectively entrenched cultural battles going on anyway is like,
Yeah.
I think a reasonable position. It's anybody who thinks they like know what the correct answer to like, should women be allowed to wear the hijab? Should they be forced to wear the hijab? Like, it's like, well, I mean, yeah, no, you like, it's not our place to say in some sense.
Yeah. I mean, for one, we're not women, and we don't live in a country where it's required at all. We're also not Muslims, though.
Yeah, and so, you know, I can believe she's sincere.
Oh, totally.
In this regard.
I think she's totally sincere on like the hijab issue, and her campaign, I think, is completely genuine. But I think when you look more into her background, you find some problematic ties to the State Department and right-wing nonprofit groups. So just a little background on her. She's a presenter and producer at the Voice of America Persian service, and also a correspondent for Radio Farda, which is basically the extension of Radio Free Europe, which is basically a CIA, State Department propaganda radio outlet, which was used in like the color revolutions throughout Europe.
Yeah, this is not conspiratorial thinking. This
No,
is
this
sort of
is-
like a knowledge project of like used to both relay information to sort of agents and resistance elements kind of across the Iron Curtain.
And in many cases, it's been found that information's been like run, and it still creates the massive process. You really can't retract what you say for information. And I'm not saying she's like just like a mouthpiece for the department. I'm just saying she's more like a useful idiot, because the State Department and like U.S. empire doesn't really give a shit what your cause is, as long as it's fighting the enemies that we don't like. So we're going to support women's and stuff if it means we can attack Iran, but then we're going to completely fuck over like women and indigenous people when it's like Latin America. We don't really care as long as it does a certain benefit to us geopolitically.
Right. And I had never heard of this person before until you told me about her. But there's such a well-known conveyor belt for the kind of neocons, and particularly anyone willing to take a position that is potentially actually quite controversial socially, right? I would think of people like some of the latecomers to new atheism in the early 2000s or whatever, late 2000s. So like Douglas Murray and Ayan Hirsi Ali, Sam Harris, Majid Nawaz, right? Anybody sort of willing to take a position that actually probably comes at quite some personal cost in polite circles, and could be a sincerely held position, but ends up finding its audience only with the most enthusiastic sort of neoconservative supporters of empire.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you happen to have a position that's critical of aspects of Islam, but not even like within the context of a you know, there are legitimate arguments going on within Islam, right, between, you know, moderates and conservatives, all sorts of things. There's all sorts of discussion going on there. But it turns out if you take a specific view on that within the argument, you'll suddenly find you have this incredible audience and backing from a bunch of effectively sort of state and quasi-state actors.
Yeah.
And so I kind of assume
That's what's going on.
this is that she's sort of a kind there, right?
No, I totally agree. I mean, just the past, I think it was a month or two ago, she was at one of the Oslo Freedom Forum, which we've talked a lot about in prior podcasts. It's basically the right-wing group that's founded by like Venezuelan like oligarchs. But she spoke there and was like, basically calls everyone that the U.S. hates like a dictator. Like Russia's a dictator, and Venezuela's a dictator, and Bolivia's a dictator, and like all these countries. And like, I don't think she knows what any of that word means, but
yeah, it just means bad, right? Bad.
But she also met with Pompeo a while back and was like saying like, I don't want war with Iran, and I don't want sanctions hurting the poor people. I just want sanctions moved to just like state media, our leaders and officials, as if the government actually gives a shit. Like, it's just kind of like a good cover image of like, look, she's against war too, but like pretty silent on a lot of this stuff. It's more just like critiquing with no overall geopolitical analysis of like the role the U.S. has played.
Yeah, I mean, you can play this game with just about anything and anywhere. Like if you, I don't know, pick a place at random, Singapore. like, why are we not desperate to liberate the poor, oppressed people of Singapore?
Yeah.
And then all you have to do, right, is sort of cherry pick the cultural and economic issues there that place them out of step with like kind of shithead coastal media elite consensus. It's not even like, it doesn't even have to be particularly good or bad or it requires no moral judgment, except it's just sort of out of character. Singapore, I think, has homosexuality is not legal.
Yeah, it's
and
not
things
legal.
Right, so there we go. Okay, so this terrible despotic regime is victimizing LGBT Singaporeans. Their desperate plight must be answered. We don't really do that because Singapore is a full member of the sort of international economic order. So
even better example is the Uganda issue, which Chick-fil-A money was going to groups that were pushing for fundamentalist Christianity, and now they've tried to put the death penalty on gays. But
but it's
we
Christianity,
don't care about
so
that. It's Uganda. It's our friend. It's the Pearl of Africa. But she also has been very critical of Iran being critical of America. So she's actually tweeted, for the last 2 years, Iranians have chanted, "They lie and say America's the enemy. Our enemy is right here in Iran." And it's like, has she ever taken a history lesson on what the U.S. did to Iran? Like, they have plenty of reasons to be mad, especially when we kept overthrowing their leaders.
Yes, I mean, Mossadegh, who was at least a sort of social dem who was trying to nationalize some oil in the 50s, met a sticky end, and then the U.S. reinstalled the Shah twice. Not to say I am no great fan of the Islamic Republic and its leadership. I think it's definitely an imposition on
Totally.
There are huge parts of sort of secular civil society in Iran that has all sorts of protests for this. They do not, as a habit at least, end up palling around with Pompeo and the sort of usual architects of international peace.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people probably would be confused, like, oh, why are gay leftists defending like Iran against American imperialism? It's like, well, the most basic tenet is like sovereignty and stuff. Like a good example is the Hamas, and like they have a gay Palestinian group, and they mention how despite Israel being a gay Mecca, it's actually, it hurts everyone, including the gays. It's not, we're thinking beyond just a basic identity, self-identity, but instead the broader population, because more people will die, like, if a war breaks out.
Yeah, I mean, the right to a certain kind of self-determination should be integral to, I think, it's integral to a socialist project, insofar as that the good part of like small L liberalism, right? The all the kind of French Revolution, high-minded Jeffersonian stuff is kind of the idea that there's some sense in which you consent to be governed, and you perhaps don't want foreign imperial armies sort of rampaging in and making all your decisions for you, even if some of those decisions are perhaps actually beneficial to you individually. I don't actually doubt that, by the time it had all shaken out in 1,000 years, and we launched our 15th land war against Iran, and the nuclear wasteland had cooled or whatever, we would. It might be true that the conditions for individual LGBT people in Iran were much improved.
Yeah.
But it's not really the way geopolitics should work.
No.
The imposition of like be free or we will turn your country into glass is not a great model for anything except imposing essentially sort of capitalist ideology on countries in a very specific, like, American-centric way.
Yeah, and that's, like, the biggest issue of why I wanted to kind of talk about this is the progressive ideology being used to justify U.S. tensions with foreign countries. Because we see it a lot, especially with like countries that maybe don't have the best records on like women's rights or gay rights, but it's kind of missing a tree for the forest. Is that how you say it? Forest for the trees.
We're gonna get you a poster on the wall. Sam's idioms chart.
Yeah. But
Missing the woods for the forest.
yeah, that's how I'm saying it. But it's also like you see it all the time, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, like, but it's so not genuine because we would go for Saudi Arabia if we cared about any of these issues. Like,
yeah, and
worse.
The charge of hypocrisy is sort of only part of the story, particularly with respect to other countries. You would have to say that if you applied this logic even minimally to the U.S., we would be sort of inviting, a foreign power to rescue our poor, abused inmates who are subject to cruel and unusual punishment and torture, or our massive mistreatment of certain ethnic minorities in the country, things like the mass subjugation of the poor.
Yeah,
you would have to sort of ask the question, like, why is it so different when we do it?
Exactly. I mean, the UN literally wrote a report about the police violence in the U.S. being a big issue. Like, does that give I don't know, like
Russia
a ability to invade the U.S. to help free?
It gives them the legal right to interfere directly with our elections and our precious, beautiful democracy.
And see, that's the contradiction. It's like libs would be so pissed about that, but they're doing the exact same thing all over the world, or at least using those elements to claim. I don't actually think they give a shit about a lot of these minority groups, or just it's kind of like Warren's. We need a green army military, and like half of all people should be women. It's like, I don't want a fucking feminist empire with green stuff. Like, I don't want an empire. Like, I don't want to just make it
more like fempire.
Yeah.
Right?
It just like you're completely missing the point, and in often cases you're making the systems way worse. Like women's treatment under the first revolution of Iran with Mossadegh like was much more free, and then they had the Shah reinstituted, and then twice, and then they have the current government, and it's much worse. But like, if you just didn't overthrow Mossadegh, who knows what Iran could have looked like? Iran's quite a secular
certainly
society
quite cosmopolitan, things like that. And I think you can separate out the question of if there were an Iranian uprising that was maybe not my personal politics, but at least was free of the stink of being just a straightforward attempt to overthrow it by the U.S.
Yeah.
Would you sort of line up and support it? Yeah, maybe, but you wouldn't even sign on to support it with bombs and arms sales, which is kind of the only way we tend to support, quote unquote, uprisings in the Middle East. So it's a tough one, but certainly I don't think we need to be taken or particularly impressed by sort of the dissident voices that find warm, loving, cuddly environments within the sort of U.S. right wing.
Exactly. And kind of going on to the next topic. This is kind of like
speaking of the cuddly right wing.
Yeah, just a brief update on Bolivia, because I know a lot of people were talking about, especially on a more like liberal or neocon right, were saying, oh, it's going to be fine. It's actually going to not be a right-wing takeover. Turns out you're all wrong.
Ron Howard, narrator voice. It was.
Yeah. Last week, there was a giant massacre in Cochabamba. They basically killed 9 native people, and there's been more killings by the state military. And a day after the Cochabamba massacre, Bolivia's new interim government basically passed a decree exempting all military from criminal persecution when maintaining public order, which is like some Pinochet shit. Like basically just giving a red light or green light to
preemptive sale of indulgences or something.
Yeah,
that's great.
So that's really amazing. That's totally not vile and
extremely right-wing.
Normal. And then also they've been arresting and expelling all of the Cuban doctors. There was like 700 in the country to help improve the medical infrastructure. Now they're all going back to Cuba, which is going to really help the working class people.
Do people know about this? I mean, like, Cuba is not merely a uniquely evil and despotic regime that has defied, U.S. attempts to free it for 50 years. They're also like just a factory that churns out doctors.
Yeah.
And doctors that tend to go out into the world, particularly parts of the world that are maybe underserved by medical professionals, and provide sort of amazing world-class healthcare.
Yeah.
In places like Bolivia, I believe Venezuela has a
Brazil,
presence.
when they had their president change, they were all kicked out as well.
Yeah, it's these are the spidery tendrils of international communism.
Yeah.
Is shit like preventing infant mortality and
just
horrible evil things that they've done.
Or like when Ebola broke out years back, Cuba just crushed an amount of doctors and medical supplies they sent to the country. And this is a country under extreme embargo. Like, imagine instead of sending like drones and military personnel, you're sending doctors to help take care of the rest of the world. Like,
well, their doctors also don't perhaps come out with hundreds of thousands of dollars of education debt to pay off. So they can go out and be do-gooders out in the world. Yeah. Fuckers. That's not why you become a doctor.
No, you become rich and impress your nana. And then also beyond just the Cuban doctor expels, there's been some major advancements of the anti-coup activists in the country. Still to this day, tons of indigenous and working class people are flooding into major cities like La Paz to fight back against this coup. And the largest worker union in the country just called for a general strike to basically shut down the economy.
One of the few times I am willing to sort of co-sign the notion of a general strike.
Yeah, because that has purpose.
General strike is such a hilarious byline for like American rad libs who are like, we need a general strike. You're like, cool. What, like, to what end? What do you want?
We just need one. We just need a
general strike. Just shut the shit down. Like, you won't, and B, why? But in this case, great idea. Because they're very clear about what they want. They would like a restoration of the legitimate government of Bolivia.
And then also protesters have taken over one of the police weapons depots near the city of Alto. And then also a bunch of police and military personnel started to leave and join the anti-coup struggle, which gives me hope it could be like a Hugo Chavez kind of like situation where like they basically overthrow the leader in Venezuela and reinstitute him because people just won't allow it. So I'm hoping it happens in Bolivia as well.
Those blue lives matter to me. So finally, a cop I can respect.
Yeah, those are the only ones we'd actually fuck.
And well, with that happy and optimistic news from Bolivia, that's basically our show. It's Thanksgiving next week.
Yeah.
So get your tofu turkeys ready.
Yeah.
Is it tofurkey?
Tofurkey is one of the brands.
Right.
Yeah, and go celebrate your Native American massacres. It's gonna be real sexy.
Yeah, here's a really fun trick for Thanksgiving this year. As many people travel, right? Go see family they haven't seen for a while. Sit around the dinner table. I recommend just sort of announcing, apropos of nothing, that you actually have Cherokee heritage. And then anytime anybody says something, right, is often people get into political claims. Like, your racist uncle will say, like, I think all the damn Muslims should be kicked out. Take that position and see if you can kind of just water it down a little bit and just reiterate it. So, no, uncle, I think some Muslims should be kicked out of the country. And just see how that goes for you. I don't know. It's working gangbusters for Elizabeth Warren for the last 40 years. So I recommend give it a shot. Like, what could you possibly lose except an election?
Or just own them and be like, listen to Twink Revolution. They'll tell you why you're wrong. That always works.
Yeah, we will be with you in spirit at your Thanksgiving table.
Yeah.
Or under your Thanksgiving table. You know, all sorts of places.
That's family. You're disgusting. And going
We're
off
not family, not my family.
Well, I mean, I assume it's their family around that dinner table.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
What do we get up to, man? I don't understand. Hey, it's a holiday commemorating the genocide of Native Americans. I don't think
And turkey
this is not going to be the lewdest part of
don't
any
forget the
fucking
turkeys.
Thanksgiving. So.
Okay, well that's all of our episode, guys. Thank you guys, and have a good Thanksgiving.
Cool. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.